In my video about the historicity of the Gospel, some folks disputed my assertion that the books of Matthew, Mark, and John were not actually written by Matthew, Mark, and John, and that none of them were first-hand accounts. So here are some excerpts from books and articles I found on Google Scholar. Here's what I found on the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew itself makes no claims concerning who wrote it. Modern scholarship has to leave the author anonymous. Nothing in the text names the author. The title, According to Matthew, was not part of the first edition. The author nowhere claims to have been an eyewitness to the events he describes. The traditional ascription of the Gospel to Matthew the tax collector, who became an apostle, raises many questions. Why is the same tax collector named Levi, son of Alphaeus, in Mark 2:14? Where did a tax collector on the margin of Jewish religious life get such an extensive education to produce this very Jewish gospel? Why did an apostle and companion of Jesus not put forward any claim to have been personally involved in the events of Jesus' life? Why did he rely on Mark and the Q document as his written sources rather than personal memory? On the Gospel of John, we start from the fact that the fourth Gospel has always been known as the Gospel of John, and this goes with the traditional view that the evangelist was the Apostle John. Although this tradition continues to have supporters among modern scholars, the majority cling to it only in the most tenuous form or abandon it altogether. It is thus important to see the reasons why the traditional identification is regarded by most scholars as untenable. The name John does not actually occur in reference to an apostle in the Gospel at all. The author of Mark seems unlikely to have been a contemporary of Jesus because his descriptions of Palestinian Jews and their practices are occasionally inaccurate. He explains Jewish practices not always accurately and does not seem to have a clear picture of Jewish leadership groups. Scholars used to believe that the contents of Mark were dictated by Peter, but there isn't any internal evidence that links the content of Mark to the preaching of Peter. The Markan negative picture of Peter and all the disciples argues against this connection. In the early 20th century, form critics theorized that the Gospel of Mark was formed from various sources such as collections of miracle stories, controversy stories, parables, a passion narrative, and other traditions that were handed down by word of mouth in the early church. Most scholars today hold this theory. There is little reason to believe that any of the Gospels were written by the people to whom they are ascribed, nor is there much reason to believe that they were written by first-hand eyewitnesses. Jesus and the people who followed him during his lifetime spoke Aramaic and were likely illiterate. Assuming the events they described were not completely made up, they were probably gathered from oral histories shared by the people of the region, making them, at best, second-hand accounts.